views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
I'm the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, and I'm delighted to see all of you here today. I'm especially delighted to see so many students here today for this event, in which we have, again, a renowned author visiting us here in Lehman, in the Bronx, Jose Alcantara Almanzar, I got that right. And members of the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies here at Lehman, as well as our translator and editor of his works, Elizabeth Arbanisi Ebert. Now, my job here is not to do introductions to our authors and translators, since that's going to be done by those who work in the field and who are familiar much more than I am with their works. But what I do want to do is to say a little bit about this department in our school as a way to introduce today's topic. So we have 9 departments in the School of Arts and Humanities, but the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies is a department that is very special to us. It is a department with an extremely broad scope in terms of the course offerings and the research interests of its faculty. It covers both Latin America and the Caribbean in its offerings and the research the faculty do, that is the South and Central American continent and the islands, including Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Hence the Latin American is the title of the program. And it also includes courses and faculty do research on the immigrant component of Latinos, Latinas, or as we now sometimes say Latinx, in the United States. Hence the Latino in the title of the program. And indeed, that title is even broader than it may sound, since its original form of expression was Latino and Puerto Rican Studies, but that is now covered under Latino Studies in general. And as the chair of the department, David Badillo, has said to me in exchanges about this department, it actually does a better job, I believe, of balancing that course offerings and interests on the part of the faculty in both the Latin American side and the Latino Studies side. I think it does a better job, really, than many other colleges in the CUNY system in that regard. And although the professors in the department are experts in those individual fields of study, they actually do a remarkable job here in the department of covering both areas. So the students benefit from faculty who are able to move between those two fields. And that is reflected in the kind of events that they have organized, such as today's event celebrating the most recent work, Where the Dream Ends, which will be talked about today. But I also wanted to share that the department is, I think, an exemplary department insofar as it works with other departments here at Lehman College to actually have a much more integrated set of courses and set of events. So even though I'm only a dean now for some 2.5 months, I have already seen the kind of interaction between the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies and other departments. It works with, for example, the Department of Languages and Literatures, which has course offerings in Spanish literature and culture. It works with the Department of Africana Studies, for example, which has offerings in Caribbean studies. And it works with the Department of English, which has offerings cross-listed in works on Mexican-American literature and art. And for that reason alone, I think we should celebrate having a department that has that kind of scope and coverage, that integrates those different fields, and that works so well with other departments. I know that some of those other departmental faculty are here today, along with members of the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies itself. So I think that's a great advertisement for the kind of integration and the kind of cooperation that we have here in the School of Arts and Humanities and more broadly here at Lehman. And the students are the beneficiaries of that. So that's what I wanted to say on behalf of the department. As the Dean of the school, I'm delighted to be able to be a co-sponsor and to welcome our speakers here today. And what I would like to do now is to turn the floor over to one of the members of that diverse, integrated and cooperative department, Magdalena Sagardia, who is going to introduce our speaker and our co-speaker, who is a translator and editor of his work. Thank you very much.
Yes. Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon. My name is Magdalena Sagardia, and I teach at the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies. Welcome to today's event, Where the Dream Ends, with author Jose Alcantara Almanzar and the English translator of the book, Elizabeth Paravicini-Gebert. First, I would like to thank and acknowledge the presence of our Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities. Thank you, Dean Mount. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the chairperson of the Department of Latin American Studies, Professor David Badillo, Professor Melissa Castillo-Payan from the Department of English. I think she's going to be around later. Professor Milagros Ricord from the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies, and our students who are here, and also Professor Juan Jesus Payan, who my students take classes with him and with me all the time from the Department of Modern Languages. I also would like to thank Jeannie Rodriguez, who helped organize this event through the Dean's office. Thank you all for your presence here today. This event has been made possible by the Lehman College School of Arts and Science and the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies. Thank you for supporting this event and all events. As I always tell my students, this is why we are here, to expand our education and to have the opportunity to meet people who have made important contributions and expand our cultural world. Today, we have with us an important author from the Dominican Republic, Jose Alcantara Almanzar. It's right here. Jose Alcantara Almanzar is an educator, a sociologist, author of essays and short stories, and a literary critic. He has been a professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo, at the Universidad Nacional Pedro Enríquez Ureña, and at the Instituto Tecnológico de Santo Domingo. He has also been a Fulbright professor at Lehman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And since 1996, and we were talking a lot about this experience, since 1996, he is the director of the Department of Cultural Affairs at the Central Bank of the Dominican Republic. Professor Almanzar has an extensive list of publications. My students will probably remember his short story, Ruidos, which has been translated as Noises, in which a man moves to a building and engages himself in a daring yet reflective game of looks with the residents of an adjacent building, remember. Jose Alcantara Almanzar has written over 20 books, including fictional works, essays, and criticism, and his short stories have been included in numerous anthologies in a career that has spanned nearly 50 years. His award-winning short stories have been translated into English, German, French, Italian, and Icelandic. In 2009, Alcantara Almanzar was awarded the Dominican Republic's National Literature Prize high honor in the letters of the Dominican Republic. Today, we are presenting a new translation of his works under the title Where the Dream Ends. The book was edited by Professor Elizabeth Paravicini-Guebert and Cecilia Gaña Rosa, and it was translated by Paravicini-Guebert, who will be in charge of presenting the book today for you. Elizabeth Paravicini-Guebert holds a Randolph Distinguished Professor Chair at Vassar College, where she serves as Chair of Hispanic Studies, as well as faculty member in the Environmental Studies Department and the Latin American Studies, International Studies, and the Women's Studies Departments. She's the author of several books and critical editions. My students will also probably remember Professor Paravicini's work. She wrote several articles on Junot Diaz's work, and also she's a specialist in Caribbean literature, as we know, and I have given you several introductions of her work. I think all of you have had to go through that introduction to the Caribbean literature. So she's the author of several books and critical editions. Her articles and literary translations have appeared in numerous literary journals. Without further ado, let me introduce you here to Professor Elizabeth Paravicini-Guebert.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. I want to start by saying that this is to me a great homecoming in a way. I spent 10 years at Lehman at the beginning of my career. I was here from 1981 to 1991. They were wonderful years. This is a campus that I hold in great affection. It was a wrenching thing for me to go elsewhere, to move to Vassar, and I had to say that I often bore my colleagues about telling them how great the students here were and how much I missed them. So I'm very, very happy to be here, and again, even for a brief moment, a part of the life of the campus. So thank you. I am delighted to be here sharing the space with Jose Alcantara Almanzar, a writer for which I hold a great, great admiration. I want to talk a little bit about what I found in his stories that compelled me to go through the effort of translating this work into English. Some of the stories I had translated before for journals and reviews, and I have to say that the work of putting together the anthology was a work of love, because trying to recreate those stories into English was really a delightful experience of trying to create something, recreate through interpreting those stories and trying to bring to the reader the most compelling possible version of that work in English. It's particularly significant for me that this launch is taking place here in Lehman, in the department where I spent those 10 years. When I was here, it was the Department of Puerto Rican Studies. And I have followed his trajectory to his present title with great interest. And this is a place where I still have many, many friends whom would keep me posted about what is happening on campus. So, born in Santo Domingo on May 2nd, 1946, Alcantara Almanzar was the eldest child of parents who had recently migrated to the capital, escaping the employment difficulties of the struggling plantation economy of the eastern half of the Dominican Republic. Those beginnings are important to understand the context of his text, because growing up during the Rafael Leonidas Trujillo dictatorship, which lasted from 1930 to 1961, this period that has been described in one of his works as forcibly calm, he spent his childhood and adolescence in the Villa Francisca neighborhood of Santo Domingo, an established working-class barrio near the Colonial District, where he attended Don Bosco School and studied music at the Escuela de Música de Villa Francisca. This moment in history is particularly significant because it was a moment of great migration, of a changing city, of a dynamism that was felt and lived on the streets of the capital like perhaps in no other period before or since. And in Jose Alcantara Almanzar, we have the narrator of that dynamic change that brought welcome and unwelcome changes to the capital. So in a brief biographical sketch, he described his childhood self as, I quote, sensitive, wistful, diffident, trustworthy, inept for physical work, and dreadful at sports. A child fascinated by book illustrations, Disney comics, and the Mexican movies broadcast by what was then the only television channel in the country, La Voz Dominicana. Alcantara Almanzar began his university education during the period of turmoil that followed the coup d'etat against Juan Bosch, the historian and short story writer who in 1963 had become the first democratically elected president of the Dominican Republic. As I said, really interesting times. The coup, as Alcantara Almanzar wrote in La Aventura Interior, marked at the beginning of a traumatic process of collective frustration that Dominicans have not surmounted yet. A night student who worked as an office clerk during the day to meet family responsibilities, he became a devoted reader of Spanish Golden Age classics. And you can see the impact of these readings all throughout the stories. He also began to study English and French, acquiring the skills to explore their literatures in the original versions, which is ironic because I'm working on a translation, right? In 1969, he embarked on a teaching career at Colegio Loyola, teaching languages and Dominican literature and history. Here he began to gather together the materials to be included in his first literary study, the groundbreaking Antología de la Literatura Dominicana, which for the first time in 1972 had put together the texts that would become important markers for what we needed to read and be aware of as we studied the literature. During the 1980s and 90s, Alcantara Almanzar consolidated his teaching career. After 4 years at Loyola, he taught briefly at his alma mater, the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo, and at the Instituto Cultural Dominicano Americano, before spending 10 years as a faculty member at the Universidad Nacional Pedro Enríquez Ureña and 20 at the Instituto Tecnológico de Santo Domingo. As we heard earlier, a Fulbright fellowship brought him to Lehman College in 1987 and 98. Jose debuted as a short story writer in 1973 with Viaje al Otro Mundo, Journey to Another World, followed in 1975 by Callejón Sin Salida, Dead End Alley, and in 1978 by Testimonios y Profanaciones, Testimonies and Desecrations. These three very early collections had already established the qualities that would define his work. The use of the dramatic to convey the character's alienation from a bewildering reality, the move away from the focus on the surprise ending and onto what Manuel Rueda would call the unbearable anguish of everydayness. And if you have read Ruidos, Noises, you know what I'm talking about. And the attention to the specificities of setting and circumstance to build tension, revealing the intensity of the character's plight. When you read his stories, you get very engaged with these characters and their situations. Alcantara Almanzar himself has addressed the goals of these collections, particularly Testimonios y Profanaciones, in these words, and I quote, "The apparent objectivity of the short, vexed, and lacerating vignettes is interwoven with the rabid subjectivity of the longer stories. The text juxtaposes short stories and vignettes. Where black humor, the underworld of Santo Domingo's drunks and prostitutes, the nouveau riche and their lifestyles, and the heart-rending experiences of characters struggling not to be crushed by circumstances prevail." Work on his this story collection alternated with the preparation of groundbreaking scholarly works on Dominican literature, which during this period of pioneering literary activity included his estudios de poesía dominicana and his anthologies Imágenes de Héctor Inchaustegui Cabral. The important thing in looking at this critical material is how important it be to set a path, give us all a kind of map to follow in beginning to understand the complexities and richness of Dominican literature, something that before that we had to go try to discover here and there with much more difficulty. These scholarly projects were the first indication that despite his extensive training in sociology, it would be as an author of seminal studies on the history and criticism of Dominican literature that he would make his mark as a scholar and essayist. So to this, we would add the publication of Narrativa y Sociedad en Hispanoamérica of 1984, Los Escritores Dominicanos y la Cultura, 1990, which consolidated his reputation as a critic and literary scholar. The publication of two new collection stories during the 1980s, La Máscara de la Seducción, The Mask of Seduction from 1983, and La Carne Estremecida, Trembling Flesh from 1989, earned him permanent membership in the inner circle of Dominican writers he had long admired. I mean, it was like this text, with this text he was in. He was in about among the great, particularly as a short story writer. Manuel Rueda, always a friend and mentor, has argued that these two collections, I quote, open new horizons in his writing by erasing the traces left of others' influences, giving his voice a new maturity and assuredness, and showcasing what he called, and I quote, his mastery of a severe style, concerned above all by the exactitude that brings him closer to the influence of Kafka, that builder of hells of everydayness through allegories and physical and metaphysical nightmares. It has been repeatedly argued that these two collections include his best short stories to date, all marked by the meticulous recreation of haunting realities and evil hidden behind masks and illusions. He is now at work on Memoria Esquiva, which upon publication will be, will bring us new and eagerly anticipated anticipated stories. Jose's vital contributions to the creation and study of Dominican literature, culture, and the arts have not gone unrecognized. As you heard before, his two collections of short stories from the 1980s, La Máscara de la Seducción and La Carne Estremecida, received the nation's an annual short story prize, the Premio Nacional del Cuento in 1984 and 1990, respectively. In 1996, he received the J. Arturo Pellerano Alfao Prize for Excellence in Journalism for his work as a newspaper and magazine critic. Many of these pieces are collected in La Aventura Interior. In 1998, he received the Caunabo de Oro Prize for his literary work. In 2008, he was the recipient of the Virgilio Díaz Grullón Medal for Merit, followed a year later by the 2009 National Literature Prize, conferred by the Ministry of Culture and the Corripio Foundation. In the announcement of their award, the National Literature Prize jury cited Jose's work for, and I quote, his valuable contributions to the nation's fiction and his transcendental style, which has established new parameters for the production of our literary narrative. So why translate his work? Jose once lamented in an interview the Dominican Republic's literature's lack of international presence, what Silvio Torres Sayan has referred to as their placement on the periphery of the margin, and their inability to traverse our island's borders, both physical and mental. An important aspect of this isolation, he argued then, was the lack of available translations of Dominican literature into English and other languages, and the impact this paucity of translated work had on its reputation and dissemination abroad. You can get to know what you cannot read, right? So where the dream ends, this collection grew precisely from a realization of the sad truth of Alcantara Almanzar's assessment of the need to bring the richness and innovation of Dominican literature to a broader international audience. Jose's short stories are an ideal point of entry into the thematic and stylistic wealth contemporary Dominican literature has to offer. Moving, urgent, piercing is how critic Orlando Alcantara Fernandez characterizes Jose's mastery of his craft. And I quote, his mark of identity as a writer from beginning to end. He's most often described as belonging to the generation of the 70s, whose chief characteristic is, I quote, the manifestation of the social, economic, and cultural changes that stemmed from the fall of the Trujillo regime and impacted most directly a peasantry in the midst of a full-blown displacement to urban centers. It's a key moment in history that needed a key voice to translate that into short stories that brought that moment in history to life, and in Jose, the period found its voice. Carmen Benitez Morales, in fact, calls the author a son of the city, arguing, and I quote, that Santo Domingo pours itself into his stories and protagonists, becoming the stage for its actions and conflicts. If you love Santo Domingo, it is there for you, vividly represented as the space of change and dynamic conflict that gave life to these stories. Formally experimental and thematically innovative, the wealth of techniques and formal new elements that he brings to the fiction is extraordinary. It gave me a real hard time in trying to bring them to life. The better the literature is, the harder it is to try to convey it in English, and this text gave me many headaches. But the short stories showcase his willingness to deploy a range of techniques drawn from both his deep understanding of the psychology and social constraints of his characters and his command of the traditions of his chosen genre. So both technician and reader. From Edgar Allan Poe to Jorge Luis Borges and Julio Cortázar, to whom Alcantara Almanzar acknowledges a profound debt, his fiction is steeped in the history of the short story while pushing its technical and thematic boundaries into new directions. Stream of consciousness, fragmented narratives, cacophonies of voices, temporal ruptures, non-human narrators are all elements he employs to advantage in order to engage the reader in the production of literary meaning. Like his predecessor and model Julio Cortázar, Alcantara Almanzar works on the assumption, and I quote, that the story is not complete without the reader, and when you find yourself confronting a book, each book will signify something different to each reader, end of quote. Hence his invitation to us to engage in the process of collaborative creation through stories in which ambiguity, uncertainty, and unreliable narrators abound. A book of tales, he has argued, and I quote, is a set of passions and anxieties that push us towards a precipice ruled by a hallucinating chaos from which we can only emerge triumphant if we are capable of establishing order over so much perplexity, end of quote. Central to Jose's fictional world, as I said, is the city of Santo Domingo, where he has lived most of his life. Its transformation from a, quote, small, clean, tree-covered, silent city divided by an Ozama River not yet turned into mud and death, end of quote, to the chaotic capital of hallucinatory noises and delusions is captured in stories of violence and persecution like He and She at the End of an Afternoon, Raw Flesh, and Seabound, where he has addressed Santo Domingo's growing class warfare and anti-Haitian violence adroitly and sensitively. From his earliest short stories, Jose had shown his deep interest in social and economic marginality as the consequence of both Santo Domingo's rapid urbanization and the fixation of its governments and institutions on protecting the interests of the middle and upper classes. He had experienced the inherent brutality of urban renewal through his own family's displacement and loss of his childhood home as part of Joaquin Balaguer's brutal project of urban remodeling, as he described it. In his fiction, Jose will address the problems of forced displacement as a permanent condition for some of the city's poor and most marginalized populations, among them young people with radical political ideas vulnerable to political violence, Haitians and undocumented Dominicans of Haitian descent, many of whom live in dilapidated shacks prone to frequent flooding along the now deeply polluted Ozama River, and those whose land has been taken over for the construction of luxury homes and for the middle class. In the grotesquely drawn Seabound, the disintegrated corpse of the narrator flows down the Ozama towards the sea, a victim of political persecution, whom among others among the most marginalized tried to rescue in vain. In He and She at the End of the Afternoon, a homeless pair desperately looking for food in the garbage cans of the rich end up being pursued by a murderous mob, running in fear for their lives alongside the privileged spaces of the rich and middle class. In Raw Flesh, a successful young man and his pampered family see the violence they had just seen reported on television invade their comfortable homes in the shape of those who had been displaced to make ways for the luxury development in which they live. This eruption of television news into their domestic space has been described by Carmen Benitez Morales as Jose's poignant depiction of how, and I quote, the margins penetrate and invade the pleasant space of suburban refuge. More recently, Santo Domingo's environmentally degraded geography and climate change have surfaced among his groundbreaking themes. One of the first authors from the Caribbean to address these very important issues. And I just lost myself. Jose, who has bemoaned the environmental changes that rapid growth and urban neglect had brought to his home city of Santo Domingo, writes in The Omen about the potentially destructive impact of rising sea levels. In his interview with Mansari, he spoke of his environmental awareness, telling his interviewer, and I quote, that the worst that can happen to his native city is happening now: the destruction of the air, the noise, the pollution, and the garbage. From his earliest tales, Jose's work has been characterized by his provocative themes and willingness to delve into the squalid and grotesque aspects of the abject. A torture-hounded transvestite, an abused left-handed child forced to conform to a right-handed world, a story one critic has compared to Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart in its intensity, a phantasmagoric pedophile, a trapped wife who metamorphoses into a butterfly to escape her confining husband, a middle-aged man who imagines a romance with a young and sultry neighbor, are among the characters that populate his stories, unveiling the complexities of society's taboos and giving us a glimpse into the hazards of attempting a taste of the forbidden. Human and poignant in their dramas and self-deceptions, these characters, some of them deeply despicable in their flawed humanity, are rooted in worlds reconstructed through deeply etched and bold realistic strokes that nonetheless unveil a world in which fantasy proliferates. One of the strengths of Jose's stories is the rich psychological complexity of his characters, whose deep affliction are rooted in multifaceted sociological and sociopolitical realities. The shady government functionary of Payback, which we will hear read today, is haunted by the ghost of those whose deaths he has arranged, victims whose tragedy is projected against the backdrop of the corrupt system that conspire in their victimization. The husband in My Startling Irene draws his controlling fancies from obsolete patriarchal notions to which he still adheres, which the story lightly catalogs through his depiction of the city his confined wife cannot explore on her own. The neurotic narrator of Noises, I'm glad to hear that some of you have read that story, morbidly spies on the intimacies and everydayness of his neighbors in order to escape the pulsating cacophony of noises that torture him in his rapidly modernizing city. I really invite you to read these stories. They are extraordinarily rich and impeccably well written. Vividly sketched and modernly present, the city and the compromised institution. Oh, I read that already. So I would just want to finish by saying that Jose's remarkable trajectory as a short story writer continues through his public contributions to the Review Santo Domingo Times. And we await a new collection gathering the stories he has published more recently, which I am looking forward to seeing and perhaps, if I get lucky, translate. The stories he has chosen for inclusion in this volume, I translated the stories that meant the most to him. This anthology, which is the first in English, give us the opportunity to sample the work that has made him the Dominican Republic's foremost contemporary short story writer. I have felt truly honored to make a small contribution to making this anthology possible, and I envy the fact that you will be reading some of these for the first time and enjoying that first confrontation of what is a remarkable career in Dominican literature. Thank you.
José, ¿quieres decir unas palabras acá?
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Let's see if I can speak English. It is a true pleasure for me to be here to share with you the presentation of the book Where the Dream Ends. And by the way, congratulations to Lehman College, because I was told you are celebrating your 50th anniversary. I must say that I have always been blessed by the company and support of women. I mean my mother, my wife, my daughter, and 2 granddaughters, and many others since I was a kid. This introduction is to express that I owe all my gratitude to the distinguished Professor Elizabeth Paravicini-Geber for almost everything, my great friend, Lisa, for her faithful friendship through the years, for her wonderful translation of this collection of short stories, for her interest and pursuit to gather them in a book, for the complete critical analysis of my fictions, and for the sage and deep understanding of my creative world. Thank you very much to Carol Hollander, the efficient editor of Caribbean Studies Press that published the book, with whom I have been in permanent contact for the last 2 years. I do not know her personally, but I can give testimony of her commitment and wonderful job, as you will immediately realize when you see the book. I wish to thank Mrs. Jeannie Rodriguez, Administrative Coordinator of School of Arts and Humanities at Lehman College, because she made possible my presence here for the launch of the book, for her wise orientations and warm hospitality. Last but not least, to the Dean James Mao, a philosopher, author and professor at important universities in the United States. I am really honored by your company this afternoon, Dr. Mount. Thanks to David Badillo, Chair of the Department of Latin American and Latin Studies, I wish to say thank you to Professor Magdalena Zagardia, who has made possible that many of her young students are here today, to Professor Payantu, whom I met a few moments ago, and friends that I had made since I was here. I arrived yesterday. And thank you very much to you all for your kind attention and company. Before reading, Randy Hernandez is going to read a short story from the book. With your permission, I would like to say that I first came to New York almost 50 years ago. To be accurate, on June of 1970, when I was a university student, still young, single, and naive. 2 years before, in 1968, the United States had suffered two devastating strokes with the murders of Reverend Martin Luther King and Senator Robert Kennedy. And one of the things that impressed me the most was the political and racial tensions in those days, especially when I traveled to the city of Detroit, where I spent the rest of my vacation. It was the splendid Detroit then. Back then, I did not know I was going to become a writer, but rather a Caribbean sociologist who dreamed with social justice and freedom. 17 years later, in 1987, when I was professor and had already published 4 collections of short stories, 2 books of essays, and several anthologies of the Dominican literature, I arrived in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, as a Fulbright Scholar in Residence of Caribbean culture and Caribbean literature during 2 semesters of the period 1987-1988. There, in the prestigious Lehman College, I was among students and colleagues from whom I learned a new conception of life. In Tuscaloosa, I understood better what it meant to be black in the deep south of the United States of America, and about poverty, racism, and inequity than all my life before. I found out the truly sense of those words the day I went to a theater and found in the hall, to my surprise, that whites and blacks were divided by the color of their skin in 2 informal groups, talking pleasantly while waiting for the doors to be opened. But to be sincere, I have to say that I also enjoy the calm and beauty of campus, the congeniality of students, and the wisdom of some good friends I met. There at Lehman College, far away from my wife, Ida, and 3 children who had stayed in Santo Domingo that year, they were 7, 11, and 14 years old then, I began to write a new book of short stories, Trembling Fresh, that was published in 1989, from which Elizabeth Paravicini-Geber has translated 5 short stories. Writing that book was a way to recover the environments of my country, memories of my city, my language and culture. In other words, an adventure to capture the essence of my soul and a sincere look at the mirror of myself. If I am not mistaken, I think Elizabeth and I met in New York many, many years ago during a seminar, and that was the beginning of a long-lasting friendship and intellectual collaboration. I am really fortunate and very grateful for the excellent job she has done. And I would like now Randy read that story, Payback. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? Excuse the hat. I have a bad hair day. Stage fright is real. Okay. Thank you, sir. This is a true honor for me. His path to power had been paved with myriad acts of treachery and countless felonies. He'd made gratuitous accusations and malicious denunciations. Betrayal and public humiliation had been frequent weapons. In order to maintain the high position he'd attained, his iniquities had known no bounds. Once enthroned as a highly placed civil servant, he'd focused on consolidating his power to becoming a millionaire. From his high positions, he'd practiced bribery, protected drug traffickers, and received copious benefits in return. He had seized public funds with impunity, granted perks to his relatives, increased his fortune through extortion, falsified documents, and stooped to any crime that fostered his interest or removed those who put obstacles in his way. But there remained witnesses to his misdeeds, a loyal assistant who knew his most intimate affairs, a tight-lipped auditor, a dear old friend rewarded for his discretion, a jealous lover, a hired killer who had followed his orders without question. He, believing himself almighty, grown arrogant from absolute power and easy riches, ordered the disappearance of these latent enemies who at any moment could have ruined everything. The assistant found in his apartment with a dagger in his heart. The disarray left behind seemed to indicate that robbery had been the motive. The auditor was suffocated with a pillow as he slept. There was no sign of violence, so everyone assumed a heart attack. The old friend was found drowned in the pool of the house the civil servant had given him during the period of lavish profits. The lover had lost her life in a spectacular accident. To tidy everything up, the hired thug had been fatally shot on his way home one evening after midnight. He attended all of the funerals except for the last one, of course, wearing new dark suits, protective sunglasses, and a mask of sadness, expressly ordered for the occasion. In each case, he sent wreaths, expressed his condolences to relatives, helped carry the coffin, and even contributed to the paying of the funeral expenses. As always, changes in the government ushered in bad times. He lost his post, his power and influence, and faced both an investigation and public ridicule. His machinations and frauds came to light. Those affected denounced his assassinations and offered proof. At the conclusion of a scandalous trial, the ex-civil servant was condemned to several years in prison, but not before enduring terrible torment. They took him to the state penitentiary, whose sordid reputation made him tremble from head to toe. After traversing numerous corridors, the guards left the former civil servant alone in a cell. Once inside, it wasn't difficult for him to identify the companions of his confinement, the specters of the loyal assistant, the old auditor, his best friend, his lover, his hitman, who greeted him in silence to mark the beginning of his reckoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie. Very good. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Elizabeth. I will ask you to come over here for a Q&A, for questions and answers from the students and the other professors. This is a treat because having Jose Alcantara Almanzar here in Lehman College after so many years, back and forth, but mostly in the Dominican Republic, but being back here is fantastic. Questions? Let me ask you something. Wait. I take this. Jenny? Or do I have to work with the whole thing? Oh, I see this one.
Muchas gracias. My name is Melissa Castillo-Blanes. I'm a professor in the Department of English. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the work of translation. Was it something that you did collaboratively? Did you, and just both for the author and the translator, as well as for the translator, perhaps, what is gained and what is lost when you bring his work to English?
I worked on my own. It was a collaborative project in that Jose picked the essays. I was amazed at the extraordinary trust he placed on me. He never asked to see anything, although he had access to. I think I had access to the manuscript before it was set and so forth. But I mean, it was extraordinary confidence. I thought I would occasionally write with a query about the meaning of something. There were a couple of times when I wasn't sure. I'm Puerto Rican, so sometimes I wanted to make sure that the word was being used corresponded to the meaning that I would have given it. But for the most part, it was I mean, I just a remarkable experience of trust I had some of the stories that appear in the collection I had translated before, and Jose had seen them. Even in those translations, I did some edits. You always sort of think better about things, and I kept going back to them, just checking against the original to make sure that I had captured as many of the nuances of the Spanish as I could in the English.
Yes, thank you. Before I answer, I would like to read some words I did not in my presentation because I see him here. And I was saying that I wish to thank you, to say thank you to my old friend Peter Vitakis. Please stand up, who is here. I didn't see him. Who is here this afternoon and who was living in Santo Domingo when he designed the first cover of my first book of short stories 40 years ago. Peter is like a brother to me, and he was living there because he worked for the Peace Corps then. And after he finished, he came. He's not New Yorker, he's Brooklynian. He once said to me, thank you, Peter, for being here. But to answer, I let Lisa select the stories she wanted to translate, because if not, it was going to be a personal anthology of my short story, and it is not. It's her anthology, I mean, she selected the short stories she liked the most. I liked what she did. I enjoy really the selection she did. I think she selected the most important ones of each book. Probably some other translator could select some others, because the 5 books is like 60 short stories. And this has 24, 20 from the books, and 4 that the forthcoming book that is not published yet. So as I trust her so much, and I feel so comfortable with her translations, I didn't know what to say. I mean, I did not have anything to say, because I cannot do the translation she did. I mean, I cannot do that. But I am very pleased that she did it, and did it so well.
Well, first of all, sorry. Congratulations, Elizabeth, for your great translation. We are so pleased to have you, Jose Alcantara Almanzar, here at Lehman. We are proud of having you here. So one of the things when reading the translation is how can we convey the notion of Dominicanness in English, right? Because you can convey the language. There are some nuances about the origin, especially when we deal with stream of consciousness. It's really, really difficult to do it. So I'm curious about what was the process like, and how did you navigate that challenge?
Well, yes, the problem with voices, particularly in stories like this that change voice from one to the next, sometimes it's very difficult, because it's not like you can pick a version of English that can best convey. I ended up focusing on how best to adapt the syntax as I translated into English, and to what extent I could play with the syntax to gather some of those personality traits. I found myself sometimes going into dictionaries of slang or dictionaries of this or that English. I love the web because it gives you all these possibilities of translation. But I think what I found myself, because what happens is that you translate something just literally, right? And then you read it and it's a terrible sentence in English, right? So you have to begin to say, okay, if I make this change, I lose this. If I make this other change, I gain this, but I lose that. So the going back and forth between the original and just sort of playing with that syntax to sometimes to leave a certain nuance of foreignness in the voice and so forth, meant that I spent a lot of time focusing on sentences. I think every story has probably 20 to 25 drafts. As I kind of kept going back and forth. Then I gave it to friends, my poor friends. I kept saying, could you read this story for me? Some of my students, just to see if they caught things that I had missed. I'm very grateful to friends for collaborating in that way. But you always lose something, and you get to the point where you say, okay, I got 97%, and I would then do one and try for 98%. But you lose something, and sometimes you're able to translate a nuance or a meaning that is culturally rooted, but for which there may not be the exact words. And then you use the sentence to try to bring that aspect to life. The key thing is that I love the stories. There is not one story in the collection that I haven't been grateful to be able to read again and again. And you kind of hope for the best. it's what you can do. I have to say that my first translations of Dominican literature happened here at Lehman. I became a translator of Dominican literature here, mostly because I wanted to teach some of these stories, particularly Jose's. I wanted to teach them to my students who were not able to read Spanish, and they weren't available. So I became a translator, if I can call myself that, here as I struggled to create materials for my classes. I remember a class that on Caribbean Introduction to Caribbean Literature was taught in English, and I wanted to have more Dominican literature. So it started here. So it to me it feels like coming full circle to come back here, because the first story by Jose that I translated as a faculty member here at Lehman.
I don't know how she could do that, because there's a story in particular. It's called The Startling Irene. It's the story of a woman who becomes a butterfly. She wants to escape a life, an oppressed life, with her husband. And she becomes a butterfly, but there are plays of words, because butterfly is mariposa in Spanish. And then I say, in a part of the story at the end, ireposa o marirene, combining mariposa and irene. How do you translate that? That's not possible. And she did it. So she had her problems with that, finding the way out. Mm-hmm. Professor Rigur?
Hi, I'm from the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies, and I just want to thank you, Professor Parancini, giving you a welcome back to
Thank
US.
you.
And you have been in my mind because we are making a version to the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the department. So, and I also want to thank you for that wonderful translation of his book, but also the collection of Dominican stories. That helped me a lot with my students when one day I had to teach literature without willing to teach literature. So I just wanted to thank you and give you a hug from me.
Thank you. I'll give back. Thanks a lot. As I said, I became a translator of Dominican literature here, and I remember sort of making a vow, right, that there were 3 writers that I thought I should translate into English: Jose, Ángel Hernández, and Pedro Vergés. So for the past decade or so, I've been, whenever I have time, I've been working on, so I have to say Ángel Hernández's a short story collection is finished, and I'm finishing the translation of Solo Cenizas Hallarás. But it has been really like a labor of love. I love the literature, but I really felt very connected to Jose's statement in that interview, maybe more than a decade ago, about the fact that there was no ready access to Dominican literature in English. Other literatures get readily translated. So I thought that might be a space in which I can make a difference. But the literature is so good, and just that desire that it be known has sort of propelled me forward. But so I thank you for that. I really appreciate it. It's nice to know that it's been useful. Thanks.
It's my turn. My name is Altagracia, and I'm in the Spanish major. And last semester we took a Dominican public literature class. And one of the stories that we read was Ruidos. And we're here wondering, what motivated you to write Ruidos? ¿Qué le motivó a escribir el cuento de Ruidos? ¿Y qué estaba usted haciendo cuando se le ocurrió eso?
My wife and I, when we got married, lived in a very tiny apartment. in Avenida Bolívar, but 6 months later, we moved to what was our house for 10 years. Peter knows that house. And it was in the barrio El Portal, very close to Parque Mirador. And I could say we were happy, and our 3 kids were born here, were born there in that house. But we moved, the house was little for us, and we moved to an apartment in Avenida Independencia, in a very good place in the sense that just in front of the building there is the Palacio de Bellas Artes, the Fine Arts Palace, so that when I wanted to attend a concert, just to cross the street. But that's a very noisy area. All the trucks that are leaving the city cross the Independencia and Máximo Gómez Avenue. And I thought I was going to become mad the first weeks and months in that apartment. And I said, well, what can happen to a person that becomes mad because of noise? Because I am very sensible to the noise. And that's why I don't speak so loud. My voice, when I was a professor, that was one of my stigmas, that I had a low voice. And that was the idea for writing the story. A man who is becoming crazy by noises of all kinds. And he discovers one day that the only way he doesn't hear the noises is when he watches what his neighbors on the next building, just in front of his building, are doing. A woman who is a painter, a couple with a kid, an old man who lives alone, another man. And he, every day, is watching what they are doing. But he is not, he wants more. And he steals the key, of the master key, to go to their apartments. And so he begins to visit their apartment and stays there, what they're doing. And he begins to steal little objects from those apartments. And he discovered one day that the painter, she was painting him. So she was watching him also. And well, one day he's in the apartment of the old man, an old man who lives alone. And he watches what he's writing. Every night he was writing. And he reads the story of a man who is becoming crazy by the noises and becomes not as a man who steals, but who watches the others. But the story is in the same moment that he is in the apartment of the old man. So the trouble was to end that story, how to end a story like that. And so when he sees his apartment from the other building, he saw them all together in his apartment. He's crazy by that time, no? And when he goes to his apartment, there's nothing. So he's crazy in that moment. And so that's the origin of that story. My sensibility to noise and my rejection to noise too. The building is there. We sold the apartment. It's not ours anymore. We moved to a house that we have been living for 31 years now. But the building is there and the apartment is there. And many stories were created when we lived there too.
We have time for 2 more questions, because I know there's some students that have class at 3:30, and we have some refreshment, and then we can continue the conversation outside.
How's it going? My name is Ruben Maria. I'm an economics major in your class, and I'm going to read your book eventually. Like, the stories, stuff like that sound interesting, but this question is more philosophical. As a Dominican American, I feel like everybody in my family majority was born in DR. I'm Dominican American, of course. How can I and others like me, it's like this new generation of Dominican Americans, or even young Dominicans coming to America, still spread like Dominican intellectualism? Do I have to have like some cultural aspects to my work that relate to Dominican culture, or is it the fact that I'm even striving to be an intellectual and I'm Dominican enough at the same time?
Well, if I understood your question, you are very young. You live here, Dominican Americans, as you define yourself. To know your culture of origin, you have to read the authors of that culture. But not only short stories, history, sociology, whatever. I don't know how close you are to what is in the Dominican Republic now or in the past decades, you know, to read the masters of that literature, like Juan Bosch, for example, and the important historians and people who have written. I published a book last year about the Dominican Republic 20th century, where I speak about the whole century. It's not translated, maybe Lisa translates that. And it drove me to the conclusion that the crisis of the Dominican Republic now is not an economic crisis or a political crisis. We have corruption, impunity, and insecurity. To me, those are the three worst problems we have now. But the big problem of our country, and I was telling Professor Zagardia in her office, is the lack of ethics. Politicians, people who are in the government, you know, why they rob the money of the people? Because there is no punishment for those crimes, you know. And in the past, when somebody did something like that, you felt like, you know, if you appear in the newspaper that you were a minister and you were robbing, stealing money, you felt shame. Now it's not like that. So the lack of ethics, to me, is the worst crisis of the Dominican society today. So to understand that, a country that is not Venezuela, is not Argentina, is not Mexico, three countries that it's not Haiti, countries that are having big problems. Because in my country, it doesn't seem to have any problem. You know, it's good, the economy is good, but it's not true. You know, because a crisis like that is worse and is more difficult to solve than any other. So, read.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Latifa Carroll. I'm here with my American Literature class, and I just wanted to know, why do you write short stories in particular?
I think a short story writer has a mentality for brief things. In a novel, you can write 10 pages, 20 pages describing an environment. In a short story, you cannot do that. I have always loved to say things in the shortest way. I think it's something of structure of your mind. And people say, why don't you write a novel? And I say, well, I would like, but when I write something, it becomes a short story. If you go to an editor, any good editor, they will say, do you have a novel? If you have a short story book, they don't want to publish your book because the short story doesn't have the prestige of a novel. Fortunately, there is a Nobel Prize who is a short storyteller 2 or 3 years ago, Remember a Woman. And I say, well, wonderful. Because I think a short story is more difficult than a novel. An excellent short story is more difficult than a good novel. But I am a short storyteller, not a novelist. But when you read a book of short stories, let's say 12 short stories, 14, 15, to find in 12 short stories 4 or 5 excellent short stories is very difficult. Very, very difficult. Because the short stories is intensity. Not only brief, but intense. And you don't have the time to spare describing things or telling things. They are not useful in the story. You have to begin just right there with action, with your character in action. I am, of course, talking about the orthodox theory of the short story. It has changed a lot. But you don't have time to waste. It is not a matter of pages. A short story can have many pages. There are many short stories of Chekhov, like The Keys, for example, is a long short story. Many short stories of Oscar Wilde, like The Ghost of Canterville, or some of the best short stories were long. Edgar Allan Poe, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, is a long short story too. So it's not a matter of pages, it's a matter of intensity. And I think I like to say my things briefly.
I have one question for you. It's about your writing and your short stories, and also about the national prize that you won in 2008. 2009. Can you tell us a little bit also for the benefit
About
of
that
our students
award?
to understand how prestigious and how important is a national prize for the tragic.
Yeah, well, for an author, for any Dominican author to win the National Award of Literature is like a dream, because it's the highest award in the country. It's an award that is given only once in a lifetime. You just receive it once. And there are many authors willing to have that award. To me, it was a great surprise, because I am a short storyteller, not a novelist, not a poet. And it surprised me when I won that award. But a writer writes not to win awards. It cannot be in your mind. That's not a purpose. You write because you want to express what you feel, what you are. Because writing is like a mirror when you look at yourself. If you win an award that you have been waiting for that, and even in the Nobel Prize, there are many writers that have, they lobby for the Nobel Prize. Did you know that? They may translate their works to the Sweden, al sueco. They install offices in Stockholm to lobby the prize. Not one, many. But really, I have never written anything thinking I'm going to win something for this. As many other things that have come to my life, they come, but I don't expect them. I have not been expecting them. And that's a double happiness.
Any other questions? No, we'll go for the refreshment. And also, the author is going to be out there with us, so we can continue the conversation while we have some debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.